The colony world of New Kansas had been settled for only 12 years when the first attacks came. It was a green world, full of tall grass that moved like waves in the wind. The human colonists had worked hard to build farms across the plains. They grew wheat and corn and raised cattle in fields that stretched for miles. Life was simple but good. Marcus Webb stood on his front porch and watched the sun go down. He was 63 years old with gray hair and hands rough from decades of work. Behind him, his farmhouse stood solid and strong. He had built most of it himself. His grandfather had been a farmer on Earth. His father had been a farmer on Mars. Now Marcus was a farmer on a world 300 light years from where humanity began. His wife Sarah came out and stood beside him. She was holding 2 cups of coffee. She gave one to Marcus and he took it with a nod of thanks. "Beautiful evening," she said. "It is," Marcus agreed. "Crop looks good this year, might be our best harvest yet." They stood together and watched the sky turn orange and pink. In the distance, they could see the lights of other farms beginning to turn on. The Webb farm was part of a settlement called Plainview. About 40 families lived there, spread out across thousands of acres of farmland. None of them knew that they were being watched. Far above the planet, hidden behind one of the moons, a ship sat in the darkness of space. It was not a human ship. The creatures inside were called the Vraxi by the few species who had survived meeting them. They were predators. They had hunted their way across a dozen worlds. They took what they wanted and killed anything that stood in their way. The Vraxi were large creatures, standing nearly 8 feet tall. They had 4 arms and skin like dark leather. Their faces were flat with wide mouths full of sharp teeth. Their eyes were black and showed no mercy. For thousands of years, they had been the top predators in their part of the galaxy. Commander Crixel looked at the images of the human settlement on his display screen. He saw the small buildings. He saw the animals in the fields. He saw the soft-looking creatures that walked on 2 legs. "What do we know about these beings?" Crixel asked. His science officer, a smaller Vraxi named Torvax, pulled up information on his console. "They call themselves humans. They have only been traveling between stars for about 300 of their years. They are weak. They have no natural weapons, no claws, no fangs. Their skin is soft and tears easily." Crixel made a sound of satisfaction. "Easy prey." "Yes, Commander. However, there is one thing that is strange about them." "What is that?" "They seem to have spread very quickly through space. In just 300 years, they have colonized over 200 worlds. That is faster than any species we have seen before." Crixel waved one of his 4 hands in dismissal. "Speed means nothing. They probably run from any real threat. Prey animals often spread quickly because they breed fast and flee faster." "Yes, Commander, that makes sense." Crixel studied the images again. The settlement was small and isolated. The nearest human military base was on another continent, thousands of miles away. By the time any help could arrive, his hunters would be done. "We will land tonight," Crixel decided. "We will take food and supplies, kill any who resist, capture some for study and entertainment. It will be a good hunt." The other Vraxi on the bridge made sounds of excitement. They had not hunted in many weeks. They were eager for blood. Down on the planet, Marcus Webb had finished his coffee and was getting ready for bed. His son Jake was in the barn, checking on a cow that was about to give birth. His daughter-in-law Lisa was putting the grandchildren to sleep. It was a normal night on the farm. Marcus went to his gun safe and entered the combination. He opened the door and looked at the weapons inside. There were 6 rifles, 4 shotguns, and 3 pistols. Every one of them was clean and ready to fire. Marcus checked them every week. He had never needed them for anything except hunting deer and scaring away the local predators. But his father had taught him something long ago. "A farmer who cannot defend his land is not a farmer," his father used to say. "He is just a man waiting to lose everything." Marcus closed the safe and went to bed. He did not know that in a few hours those words would be tested. The Vraxi landed their ship in a valley about 5 miles from the settlement. 50 warriors crept out into the night. They carried weapons that could fire bolts of energy. They had blades attached to their lower arms. They moved quietly through the tall grass, using the darkness as cover. Crixel led them himself. He wanted to be the first to taste human blood. His hunters spread out in a line and began moving toward the nearest farm. It belonged to a family named Chen. Old man Chen was 75 years old. He had been a Marine before he became a farmer. He had fought in 3 wars and had seen things that gave him nightmares. When he retired, he wanted peace. He wanted to grow vegetables and watch his grandchildren play, but he never forgot what he had learned in his years of fighting. He had sensors around his property. Not the fancy military kind, but simple ones that he had built himself. They detected movement and sent an alert to his computer. When 50 large shapes started moving through his fields, the alert woke him up. Chen sat up in bed and looked at his screen. His old eyes narrowed. "What the hell?" he muttered. He zoomed in on the images. The cameras were infrared so he could see heat signatures. The creatures were big, much bigger than any animal on this planet, and they were moving in a formation, like soldiers. Chen got out of bed and grabbed his radio. He pressed the button and spoke in a calm, steady voice. "This is Chen at the Eastern Farm. We have unknown contacts approaching from the valley, 50 plus. They are large and moving in tactical formation. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill." All across the settlement of Plainview, radios crackled to life. Farmers woke up. Lights turned on. Gun safes opened. The Vraxi had no idea what was coming. At the web farm, Marcus was already up and moving. Sarah was beside him, pulling her rifle from the safe. Jake came running from the barn. "Dad, what's happening?" "Don't know yet. Chen says we have contacts. Big ones. Get your wife and kids to the shelter. Then get your guns." Jake nodded and ran to the house. Lisa was already awake, holding both children. She looked scared but determined. "The shelter?" she asked. "The shelter," Jake confirmed. Every farm in Plainview had a shelter. They were built deep underground, with thick walls and heavy doors. The colonists had built them for protection against storms, but they worked just as well for protection against other things. Lisa took the children down into the shelter. Jake made sure they were safe, then he went back up and grabbed his rifle. His father was already outside, watching the darkness. All across the settlement, the same scene was playing out. Families were waking up. Children were being moved to safety. Men and women were grabbing weapons and taking positions. The emergency communication system activated. A calm female voice spoke through speakers in every home. "Alert, unknown threat detected. All civilians to shelters, defense teams to positions." The voice of Chen came over the radio again. "I can see them now. They are some kind of aliens, tall, 4 arms. They are carrying weapons. They are about to reach my property line." Marcus keyed his radio. "Chen, do not engage alone. Fall back and wait for support." There was a pause. Then Chen's voice came back and there was something hard in it, something old and familiar. "Negative, Webb. They are on my land. I will give them one warning. If they do not leave, I will defend my property." Marcus closed his eyes for a moment. He understood. A man's land was his land. You did not run from your own home. "Understood, Chen. We are on our way." The Vraxi reached the fence line of Chen's farm. Crixel stopped and looked at the small house in the distance. Lights were on inside. The prey was awake. That was unusual. Normally, prey animals did not know danger was coming until it was too late. Then a voice came from the darkness. It spoke in a language the Vraxi did not understand. Crixel's translator worked for a moment, then provided the meaning. "This is private property. You have 10 seconds to leave. If you do not leave, I will open fire." Crixel laughed. His hunters laughed with him. A prey animal was threatening them. This was amusing. "Translator, respond in their language," Crixel ordered. "Tell them that we are the Vraxi. Tell them that we take what we want. Tell them that if they surrender, we will kill them quickly." The translator broadcast the message. There was silence for a moment. Then the voice came back. It was calm and steady. 5 seconds. Crixel made a gesture. His hunters began to advance. Old man Chen sat in his position, watching through his rifle scope. He had fought aliens before. He had fought humans before. He had learned that every creature, no matter how big or scary, could be killed. You just had to hit them in the right place. The big ones were coming closer. They were confident. They thought he was prey. Chen had been many things in his life. He had been a soldier. He had been a killer. He had been a husband and a father and a grandfather, but he had never been prey. His finger touched the trigger. "Time's up," he said. The night exploded with the sound of gunfire. The first shot hit Crixel in the shoulder. The impact spun him around and knocked him to the ground. Pain exploded through his body. He had been shot before, but never like this. The projectile had torn through his armor like it was paper. Around him, his hunters were falling. The night was full of noise and fire. Crixel saw one of his warriors take a hit to the chest and go down. Another was hit in the leg and crashed into the grass. "Return fire," Crixel screamed. "Return fire." The Vraxi began shooting back. Their energy weapons lit up the darkness with blue-white bolts, but they could not see their enemy. The shots were coming from multiple directions. How many humans were there? Chen had moved after his first shot. That was basic combat training. Shoot and move, never stay in one place. He ran through his own fields using the crops for cover. He fired again and again. Each shot found a target. But Chen was just one man. He was slowing them down, but he could not stop 50 warriors by himself. "Chen, hold on, we are almost there." Marcus Webb and 15 other farmers were driving across the fields in their trucks. They had guns mounted on the backs of the vehicles. These were not military weapons. They were tools that farmers used to defend their livestock from predators, but they were effective against anything that bled. The Vraxi were starting to recover from the initial shock. They spread out and began to advance more carefully. Some of them fired at the muzzle flashes they could see in the darkness. One of their shots came close to Chen, burning a hole in the ground near his feet. "I'm taking fire," Chen reported. "Could use that support now." 30 seconds, Marcus replied. The trucks came over a small hill and their headlights lit up the field. For the first time, the farmers could see what they were fighting. The creatures were huge and terrifying. They had 4 arms and faces full of teeth. They looked like monsters from a nightmare. But farmers do not run from nightmares. Farmers work through pain and fear and exhaustion. They face droughts and floods and plagues. They fight nature itself to grow food and raise animals. A few ugly aliens were not going to make them run. "Open fire," Marcus shouted. The mounted guns began to roar. Heavy caliber rounds tore into the Vraxi lines. The farmers had spent years shooting at targets. They had practiced for this moment without knowing it. Their aim was good. Crixel watched in disbelief as more of his hunters fell. This was impossible. These were supposed to be weak prey animals. They were supposed to run and scream and beg for mercy. Instead, they were fighting back with skill and determination. "Fall back," Crixel ordered. "Fall back to the ship." The surviving Vraxi began to retreat. They ran through the grass, chased by bullets and the headlights of human vehicles. Crixel ran with them, clutching his wounded shoulder. He had never retreated from prey before. The shame burned worse than the wound. Behind him, he could hear the humans cheering. They were celebrating their victory. They thought they had won. Crixel made a silent promise. He would be back, and next time he would bring an army. But the farmers were not done yet. Marcus Webb watched the aliens run. He saw them heading toward the valley where their ship must be hidden. He keyed his radio. "All units, this is Webb. The enemy is retreating toward the western valley. Do not pursue into unknown terrain. Form a defensive perimeter around the settlement. We will wait for dawn." "Copy that, Webb." "Understood." "What about chasing them down?" That last voice was Jake. Marcus looked at his son. The young man was eager. His blood was up. He wanted to finish the fight. "No," Marcus said firmly. "We don't know how many there are. We don't know what weapons they have. We fought them off our land. That's enough for now." Jake looked like he wanted to argue, but then he nodded. His father had been right about everything else tonight. The farmers formed a circle around Plainview. They positioned their trucks and their guns to face outward. They watched and waited as the sky began to grow lighter in the east. Old Man Chen came driving up in his own truck. There was a burn mark on the side where an energy bolt had hit, but Chen was smiling. "Damn good shooting tonight," he said as he climbed out. "Everyone okay?" Marcus nodded. "Some minor injuries, nothing serious, you." Chen showed a burn on his arm. "One of them got close, but I got closer." He patted his rifle. "Been a long time since I had to do that." "You did good, Chen, real good." The old man's smile faded a little. "They'll be back, you know. Creatures like that don't give up after one fight." Marcus knew it was true, but he also knew something else, something that the aliens did not understand yet. "Let them come," he said. "We'll be ready." As the sun rose over Plainview, the farmers stayed at their posts. They were tired, they were scared, but they were also proud. They had faced monsters in the night and they had not run. They had stood their ground and fought. In the valley, the Vraxi ship lifted off and rose into the sky. It disappeared into the darkness of space, but everyone knew it would be back. The news of the attack spread quickly. Within hours, every human settlement on New Kansas knew what had happened. Within days, the entire colony was mobilizing. Military units were being transferred. Defense systems were being activated. And on every farm in every small town, people were checking their weapons and preparing for war. The Vraxi had made a terrible mistake. They had thought humans were easy prey. They had thought farmers were weak and helpless. They did not understand what a human farmer really was. A farmer was someone who wrestled a living from the land. A farmer was someone who watched their crops die and planted again. A farmer was someone who worked from sunrise to sunset and then did it again the next day. A farmer was someone who built their life with their own hands and defended it with their own blood. The Vraxi had attacked farmers. They had attacked the strongest, most stubborn, most determined people that humanity produced, and now they would learn what that meant. Marcus Webb stood on his porch and watched the sun rise. His rifle was leaning against the wall beside him. His son was standing next to him. His grandchildren were safe in the shelter below. "What now, Dad?" Jake asked. Marcus took a deep breath of the morning air. It smelled like grass and dirt and gunpowder. It smelled like home. "Now we get ready," he said. "They came for our land. They came for our families. They will not get them. Not today, not ever." Jake nodded. He understood. They all understood. The war had begun. 3 weeks passed after the first attack. The colony of New Kansas had changed. What was once a peaceful farming world was now a planet preparing for war. But the farmers had not stopped being farmers. They still worked their fields. They still tended their crops. They just did it with guns on their backs and eyes on the sky. Governor Helen Torres stood in the Capitol building and looked at the report on her desk. She was a small woman with silver hair and sharp eyes. She had been a farmer herself before she went into politics. She understood the people of this world because she was one of them. "The military is sending reinforcements," her aide said, "but they won't arrive for another month." Helen nodded slowly. "A month is a long time. What about local defenses?" "Every settlement has formed a militia. We have about 12,000 armed civilians ready to fight. plus the 2,000 regular military personnel already stationed here. What about weapons, equipment? That's where it gets interesting. The aide pulled up some data on his tablet. The farming equipment on this planet is versatile. The colonists have been modifying their tools. Helen raised an eyebrow. Modifying how? Well, for example, the grain harvesters. Some of them have been fitted with armor plating and mounted weapons. The colonists are calling them battle tractors. Helen almost smiled. Almost. What else? The irrigation drones have been converted to surveillance and attack platforms. The crop dusters are now capable of dropping explosives, and someone figured out how to turn a fertilizer spreader into a flamethrower. This time Helen did smile. That's my people. What about the alien threat? Any sign of them? Long-range sensors have detected a Vraxi fleet gathering near the outer planets. We estimate at least 20 ships, maybe more. The smile faded. 20 ships meant thousands of Vraxi warriors. That was not a raiding party. That was an invasion force. How long until they reach us? Based on their current position and likely travel speed, we estimate 1 week. 1 week. Helen stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the city below. It was a small city by Earth standards, maybe 50,000 people. Most of them had come here to get away from the crowded worlds. They wanted space and freedom and a simple life. Now they were going to have to fight for it. Send a message to all settlements, Helen said. Tell them what's coming, tell them to prepare, and tell them that we will not run. This is our world. We built it with our hands. We will defend it with our lives. Far across the plains in the settlement of Plainview, Marcus Webb received the message. He gathered the other farmers in the town meeting hall. There were about 200 people there, men and women, young and old. All of them had weapons. All of them were ready. Marcus stood at the front of the room and read the governor's message. When he finished, there was silence. Then old man Chen stood up. Well, Chen said, I guess we better get to work. There was no argument, no debate. No one suggested running or surrendering. They just got to work. Over the next few days, the settlement of Plainview transformed. Trenches were dug around the farms. Bunkers were built from concrete and steel. Fields of fire were cleared. Defensive positions were established at every high point. The farmers worked together like they always had. When someone needed help, others came. When someone was tired, others took over. They did not complain. They did not give up. They just kept working. Marcus supervised the construction of the main defensive line. It ran along a ridge that overlooked the valley where the Vraxi had landed before. If the aliens came back to the same place, they would have to cross a killing field to reach the settlement. Jake was in charge of the mobile units. He had organized a force of 30 trucks with mounted weapons. They would be able to move quickly to wherever the fighting was heaviest. Sarah and the other women had organized the medical stations and supply lines. The children and elderly were moved to the deep shelters. Everything was planned. Everything was ready. On the 5th day, a military shuttle landed in Plainview. A young officer stepped out and looked around at the fortifications with wide eyes. I'm Lieutenant Peters, he said. I've been sent to coordinate with your militia. Marcus shook his hand. Marcus Webb, I'm the settlement leader. What can we do for you, Lieutenant? Peters looked uncomfortable. Actually, sir, I was sent to help you, but it looks like you don't need much help. Marcus smiled. We always need help, son. Come on, I'll show you what we've built. They walked through the settlement. Peters saw the trenches and bunkers. He saw the armed farmers at their posts. He saw the modified farm equipment that had been turned into weapons of war. This is incredible, Peters said. Did you learn all this in the military? Some of it, but mostly we just figured it out. When you're a farmer, you learn to solve problems. You learn to use what you have. You learn that nobody is going to save you except yourself. Peters nodded slowly. He was beginning to understand something. These farmers were not just civilians. They were survivors. They had built a life on a hostile world with nothing but their hands and their will. Fighting was just another problem to solve. "What about the other settlements?" Peters asked. "Are they as prepared as you?" "More or less. We've been sharing information. What works here might work somewhere else. What fails here is a lesson for everyone." They reached the top of the ridge and looked out over the valley. The grass waved in the wind like a green ocean. It was beautiful, it was peaceful, and in 2 days it would be a battlefield. "They're coming," Peters said quietly. 20 ships or more, thousands of warriors." "I know. Are you scared?" Marcus thought about the question. He thought about his family, his friends, his home. He thought about everything he had built and everything he had to lose. "Yes," he said honestly. "I'm scared, but that doesn't change anything. This is my land. These are my people. I will defend them or I will die trying. Fear doesn't enter into it." Peters was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "My grandfather was a farmer on Earth. He used to say that farmers were the backbone of civilization." "Smart man." I didn't understand what he meant until now. They stood together on the ridge and watched the sun begin to set. Tomorrow the enemy would come. Tomorrow the real fight would begin. But tonight they would rest. They would eat dinner with their families. They would hold their children and kiss their wives. They would remember what they were fighting for. Across the planet, in 100 settlements just like Plainview, the same scene was playing out. Farmers were preparing for war. They were scared. They were determined. They were ready. The Vraxi were coming, but the farmers would be waiting. In orbit around New Kansas, the first Vraxi ships appeared. Commander Crixel stood on the bridge of his flagship and looked at the planet below. His shoulder had healed, but the shame of his defeat still burned. "How many humans are on this world?" he asked. "Approximately 2 million, his science officer replied. "And how many warriors do we have?" 15,000, Commander, with full weapons and armor." Crixel made a sound of satisfaction. 15,000 Vraxi warriors against 2 million humans, but most of those humans were not fighters. They were farmers and workers and children. The real fighting force was much smaller. "Begin the landing," Crixel ordered. "We will show these humans what it means to fight the Vraxi." The ships began their descent. They came down in multiple locations across the planet. The invasion had begun. On the ground, the sensors detected the enemy approach. Alarms sounded. People rushed to their positions. The moment they had prepared for was here. Marcus Webb stood in his trench and watched the sky. He could see the lights of the enemy ships growing brighter. His rifle was in his hands. His son was beside him. His people were behind him. "Here they come," Jake said. "Yeah," Marcus agreed. "Here they come." The first ship landed in the valley. Its doors opened and Vraxi warriors poured out. They formed ranks and began to advance. There were hundreds of them, maybe thousands. Marcus raised his rifle and sighted down the barrel. He waited. The enemy came closer, closer. "Hold your fire," Marcus said calmly into his radio. "Wait for my signal." The Vraxi were confident. They marched forward in tight formation, their weapons ready. They expected the humans to run. They expected easy prey. They were wrong. "Fire," Marcus said. The ridge erupted with gunfire. Every bunker, every trench, every hidden position opened up at once. The sound was deafening. The effect was devastating. The Vraxi front line was torn apart. Warriors fell by the dozens. The neat formation dissolved into chaos. The screams of the wounded filled the air. "Keep firing," Marcus shouted. "Don't let them regroup." The farmers obeyed. They poured round after round into the enemy ranks. They had practiced for this. They had prepared for this. And now they were doing it. The Vraxi tried to return fire. Their energy weapons blazed in the growing darkness. But they were shooting uphill at hidden targets. The humans had cover. The humans had the high ground. The humans had home field advantage. Commander Crixel watched from a distance as his warriors died. He could not believe what he was seeing. These were farmers, soft, weak farmers. How were they doing this? But even as he watched, something began to change. The initial shock was wearing off. The Vraxi were professional warriors. They had fought many battles. They knew how to adapt. The surviving warriors spread out and took cover. They began to return fire more effectively. The humans in the trenches started taking casualties. The battle was no longer one-sided. "They're adapting," Jake said, ducking as an energy bolt sizzled over his head. "I know," Marcus replied. "Time for Phase 2. Jake, bring in the mobile units." Jake grabbed his radio. "All mobile units, this is Web 2. Execute flanking maneuver. I repeat, execute flanking maneuver." From both sides of the valley, the trucks came roaring in. They had circled around while the enemy was focused on the ridge. Now they hit the Vraxi from the sides, their mounted guns blazing. The alien formation collapsed. Caught between the fire from the ridge and the fire from the flanks, they had nowhere to go. Warriors fell in heaps. The ground was covered with bodies. Crixel watched in horror. This was a massacre. His warriors were being slaughtered by farmers. "Retreat," he screamed into his communicator. "All units retreat to the ship." The surviving Vraxi ran. They abandoned their dead and wounded. They fled back toward their landing ship. The farmers let them go. They had won this round. But the battle was not over. Across the planet, similar fights were happening at every settlement. Some were going well, others were not. The war for New Kansas had truly begun. Marcus Webb stood in his trench and watched the enemy retreat. He was breathing hard. His hands were shaking, but he was alive. His son was alive. His people had held. Around him, the farmers were cheering. They had faced the monster and they had won. They had proven that they were not prey. But Marcus did not cheer. He looked at the bodies in the valley. He looked at the wounded being carried to the medical stations. He knew that this was only the beginning. The Vraxi would be back. They would come with more warriors and more weapons. The fighting would get worse before it got better. Many more would die. But for now they had won. For now they had held their ground, and that was enough. "Good job, everyone," Marcus said into his radio. "Rest while you can. They'll be back soon." He sat down in the trench and leaned against the dirt wall. He was tired, so tired, but there was no time to sleep. There was never enough time. Jake sat down next to him. "We did it, Dad." "We did. Do you think we can do it again?" Marcus looked at his son. He saw the fear in Jake's eyes, but he also saw something else. He saw determination. He saw courage. He saw a farmer who would not give up. "Yes," Marcus said. "We can do it as many times as we need to. That's what we do. We keep going. We never quit. We're farmers." Jake nodded. He understood. The night was dark and full of danger, but the farmers of New Kansas were ready. They had faced their enemy and they had not run. They had proven something to themselves and to the universe. Humans were not prey. Humans were fighters, and farmers were the toughest fighters of all. The battle for New Kansas entered its second week. The Vraxi had landed forces at 12 different locations across the planet. At each location, they found the same thing: farmers who refused to run, farmers who fought back with everything they had. Commander Crixel could not understand it. His species had conquered a dozen worlds. They had faced many different prey species. Some had been strong, some had been fast, some had been clever, but all of them had eventually broken. All of them had learned to fear the Vraxi. The humans were different. Crixel stood in his command tent and studied the map of the battlefield. Red marks showed where his forces had been pushed back. There were many red marks. "Explain this to me," he said to his officers. "We have 15,000 warriors. We have superior technology. We have centuries of combat experience. How are we losing to farmers?" His officers looked at each other nervously. None of them wanted to answer. Finally, Torvax spoke. "Commander, I have been studying the humans. I believe I understand what is happening." "Speak." "The humans do not think like prey. When they see a threat, they do not run. They prepare, they plan, they organize, and then they fight. All prey species fight when cornered. They fight and they die." "Yes, Commander, but the humans are never cornered. They choose where to fight. They choose when to fight. They use their knowledge of the land to create advantages. They have turned every settlement into a fortress." Crixel slammed his fist on the table. "They are farmers, they grow food. How did they learn to fight like this?" Torvax hesitated. "I have done more research, Commander. The humans have a complicated history. They have been fighting wars for thousands of years, fighting each other mostly. They are very good at it. But these are not soldiers, these are farmers. Among humans, the distinction is not as clear as it is among other species. Many of their greatest warriors came from farming backgrounds. They have a saying, 'The farmer fights because he has nowhere else to go.' Their attachment to land, to home, makes them difficult to defeat." Crixel was silent for a long moment. He had underestimated these creatures. He had thought they would be easy prey. He had been wrong. "What do you recommend?" he asked finally. "We cannot win through direct assault. The humans are too well prepared. We must find another way." At the settlement of Plainview, Marcus Webb was dealing with his own problems. The defensive line had held, but the cost was high. 12 farmers had been killed in the first battle. 20 more were wounded. Supplies were running low. He sat in the meeting hall with the other settlement leaders. They were connected by radio to other settlements across the planet. Governor Torres was on the line from the capital. "We have held them so far," Torres said, "but we cannot keep this up forever. The military reinforcements are still 2 weeks away." 2 weeks is a long time," someone said. "I know, that's why I'm changing our strategy. We cannot just defend, we need to go on the offensive." There was murmuring among the farmers. Offensive operations, against a superior force. Marcus spoke up. "What did you have in mind, Governor?" "The Vraxi have established a main base in the northern mountains. It's where they coordinate their attacks. If we can destroy that base, we will cripple their ability to fight." "How many defenders?" "Unknown, probably thousands." "And you want us to attack it?" Torres paused. When she spoke again, her voice was firm. "I'm asking for volunteers. This will be the most dangerous mission of the war. Many of you will not come back, but if we succeed, we can end this." The room was silent. Marcus looked around at the faces of his neighbors, his friends, people he had known for years, people who had families and farms and dreams. Then Old Man Chin stood up. "I'll go." Others started standing. One by one, Jake stood, then Sarah, then farmers from every settlement. Marcus felt a lump in his throat. These people were not soldiers. They were farmers. They should be working their fields, not volunteering for suicide missions. But they were also human, and when their world was threatened, they stood up. They always stood up. "I'll lead the mission," Marcus said. Tor's voice came back. "Are you sure you don't have to?" "Yes, I do. These are my people. I won't ask them to do something I'm not willing to do myself." "Very well, the attack will begin in 3 days. Use the time to prepare." And Marcus. "Yes, Governor." "Thank you, all of you. You're making history." The line went silent. Marcus looked at the volunteers. There were about 200 of them, farmers with rifles, old men and young women, ordinary people doing extraordinary things. "All right," Marcus said, "let's get to work." The next 3 days were a blur of activity. The volunteers trained together. They learned how to move as a unit. They studied maps of the enemy base. They practiced assault techniques. Lieutenant Peters helped where he could. He was impressed by how quickly the farmers learned. They didn't have military discipline, but they had something else. They had determination. They had grit. They had an unshakable belief that they would win. "You know," Peter said to Marcus on the eve of the attack, "I've served with soldiers my whole career. Professionals, trained killers, but I've never seen anything like you people." Marcus was checking his rifle for the 100th time. "What do you mean?" "You're not afraid to die, but it's not reckless. It's not suicidal. You're willing to die because you have something worth dying for. That's rare." Marcus thought about it. "I guess so. When you spend your life building something, you learn what it's worth. A farm isn't just dirt and crops, it's your blood, your sweat, your tears. It's every sunrise you watched and every storm you survived. When someone threatens that, you don't think about the odds, you just fight." Peters nodded slowly. "My grandfather was right. Farmers are the backbone of civilization." "We try to be." The attack began before dawn. The volunteer force moved through the mountains in small groups. They used the terrain for cover. They avoided enemy patrols. They got closer and closer to the main base. Marcus led the way. His heart was pounding. His mouth was dry, but his hands were steady on his rifle. He had done harder things than this. He had survived drought and flood and plague. He had watched his crops die and planted again. He had buried his father and held his newborn son on the same day. This was just another challenge, another obstacle, another thing to overcome. The enemy base came into view as the sun rose. It was built into the side of a mountain. There were walls and towers and weapons platforms. There were thousands of Vraxi warriors inside. Marcus looked at the people beside him. Chen was there, his old face set in grim determination. Jake was there, his young eyes burning with purpose. Sarah was there, her rifle ready. "Remember the plan," Marcus whispered. "First team hits the main gate. Second team hits the power station. Third team gets the command center. We have 30 minutes to get in and get out. After that, the air support arrives and levels this place." Everyone nodded. They knew their jobs. They were ready. "Let's go," Marcus said. They moved. The Vraxi guards never saw them coming. The farmers had learned how to move quietly. They had spent years hunting deer and tracking predators on their farms. Those skills translated well to combat. The first shots were surgical, precision kills. Guards fell without raising an alarm. The assault teams moved through the outer defenses like ghosts. Then someone tripped an alarm. Sirens began to wail. Lights began to flash. Vraxi warriors poured out of every building. "Contact," someone shouted. "Stick to the plan," Marcus shouted back. "Keep moving." The battle erupted into chaos. The farmers fought with everything they had. They used cover. They used tactics. They used the skills they had learned over years of hard living. Chen led the attack on the main gate. He was 75 years old and he moved like a man half his age. His rifle never stopped firing. He cut through the enemy like a blade through wheat. Jake led the attack on the power station. His team fought through waves of Vraxi defenders. They took casualties. They kept going. They reached the generators and set the charges. Marcus led the attack on the command center. It was the hardest target, the most heavily defended, but it was also the most important. If they could destroy it, the entire Vraxi operation would collapse. They fought their way through corridors and rooms. Every step was paid for in blood. Farmers fell. Vraxi fell. The floor was slick with both. Finally, they reached the command center. Marcus kicked in the door. Inside, he found Commander Crixel. The two leaders faced each other across the room. Crixel was huge and terrifying. Marcus was just a farmer with a gun. "You," Crixel growled, "you are the one who has caused so much trouble." "I'm just a farmer defending his land," Marcus replied. "You are more than that. You are a warrior. I have fought many species. None have fought like you. We're human. Fighting is what we do." Crixel raised his weapon. Marcus raised his. They fired at the same time. Crixel's shot hit Marcus in the side. Marcus's shot hit Crixel in the chest. Both of them fell. Marcus lay on the ground, feeling the blood flow from his wound. He could hear fighting in the distance. He could hear explosions. The power station charges had detonated. Sarah appeared above him. Her face was covered in dust and blood. She was crying. "Marcus, Marcus, stay with me." "Did we get him?" Marcus asked. Sarah looked at Crixel's body. The Vraxi commander was not moving. "Yes, you got him." "Good." Marcus closed his eyes. "That's good." "Don't you dare die, Marcus Webb. Don't you dare." Marcus smiled weakly. "Wouldn't dream of it. I've got crops to harvest." They carried him out of the base as the air support arrived. Human aircraft from the capital screamed overhead, dropping bombs on the enemy positions. The Vraxi base was destroyed in fire and smoke. The attack was a success. The enemy command structure was broken. The Vraxi forces across the planet began to fall apart without coordination. But the cost was high. 63 farmers died in the assault. Hundreds more were wounded. Marcus was among them. He woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed. Sarah was beside him, holding his hand. Jake was standing by the window. "What happened?" Marcus asked. "We won," Sarah said. "The Vraxi are retreating. The military reinforcements arrived early. It's over." Marcus let out a long breath. "We won." "You were unconscious for 3 days. The doctors said you lost a lot of blood. They didn't think you would make it. Takes more than that to kill a farmer." Sarah laughed through her tears. "You stubborn old man." Jake came over and put his hand on his father's shoulder. "You saved us, Dad. You saved all of us." Marcus shook his head. "We all saved each other. That's what we do. That's what we've always done." Outside the window, the sun was shining on the fields of New Kansas. The war was over. The rebuilding would begin. And the farmers would do what they had always done. They would plant. They would harvest. They would build. They would survive. Because that's what farmers do. 1 year after the war, the planet of New Kansas held a memorial ceremony. People came from every settlement, from every farm, from every corner of the world. They gathered in the capital city to remember those who had died and to celebrate those who had survived. Governor Helen Torres stood on a stage before thousands of people. Behind her was a new monument. It was made of stone and metal, shaped like a farmer standing tall with a rifle in one hand and a tool in the other. "1 year ago," Torres began, "our world was attacked by an enemy who believed we were weak. They thought we were prey. They thought farmers could not fight." She paused and looked out at the crowd. She saw families. She saw children. She saw old men with scars and young women with medals. She saw the people who had defended their home. "They were wrong," she continued. "They learned what humans have always known, that the people who grow our food, who build our homes, who work the land with their hands, are the strongest people of all. They are the backbone of our civilization, and when our civilization is threatened, they are the first to stand up." Cheers rose from the crowd. Torres waited for them to quiet. "Today we honor the 273 people who died defending New Kansas. They were farmers. They were mothers and fathers. They were sons and daughters. They were ordinary people who did extraordinary things. We will never forget them." In the crowd, Marcus Webb stood with his family. His wound had healed, but it still ached sometimes. The doctors said it would always ache. He didn't mind. It reminded him of what they had sacrificed. Sarah held his hand. Jake stood beside him with his wife and children. Old man Chen was there too, leaning on a cane but standing proud. "Quite a speech," Chen said. "She's good with words," Marcus agreed. "You should be up there too. You led the attack that ended the war." Marcus shook his head. "I just did what needed to be done, same as everyone else." Chen smiled, still humble. "That's what I like about you, Webb." After the ceremony, there was a celebration. Music played. People danced. Children ran through the streets laughing. It was a day of joy and remembrance. Marcus found a quiet spot away from the crowd. He sat on a bench and watched the sunset. The sky turned orange and pink, just like it did on his farm. A young man approached him. He was wearing a military uniform with many medals on his chest. "Mr. Webb." Marcus looked up. "That's me. I'm Captain Peters. We met during the war." Marcus remembered. The young lieutenant who had been sent to help the militia. He had grown up a lot in the past year. "I remember you. Congratulations on the promotion." "Thank you, sir. I wanted to tell you something. After the war, I was offered a position on Earth. Prestigious assignment, career advancement, everything a soldier could want." "Sounds good." "I turned it down." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Why?" Peter sat down on the bench beside him. "Because of you, because of what you taught me. I realized that being a soldier isn't about medals and promotions. It's about protecting people, protecting communities. I wanted to stay here and help rebuild." Marcus was silent for a moment, then he nodded slowly. "That's a good reason. I also wanted to say thank you for showing me what real courage looks like. It's not about being unafraid. It's about being afraid and fighting anyway. It's about having something worth fighting for. That's a farmer's philosophy." "I know my grandfather would be proud." Peters smiled. "I'm thinking about buying some land, learning to farm. Would you teach me?" Marcus looked at the young man. He saw sincerity in his eyes. He saw the desire to build something, to create something, to belong to the land. "Sure," Marcus said. "I can teach you, but fair warning, it's hard work. I know, I watched you fight. I know you don't do anything the easy way." They shook hands. The sun continued to set. The celebration continued in the distance. Life continued. The news of what happened on New Kansas spread throughout the galaxy. The Vraxi had been defeated by farmers. The great predators had been humbled by people who grew food. Other species took notice. They had always seen humans as young and weak. They had always underestimated them. Now they understood the truth. Humans were dangerous, not because they were the strongest, not because they were the fastest, not because they had the best technology. They were dangerous because they never gave up. They were dangerous because they would fight to the last breath to protect what was theirs. They were dangerous because a human farmer, standing in his field with a rifle, was one of the most formidable warriors in the universe. The Galactic Council held a meeting to discuss the implications. Representatives from 100 species gathered to debate what to do about humanity. An elderly alien, one of the oldest and wisest in the council, stood to speak. "I have lived for many centuries," he said. "I have seen species rise and fall. I have seen empires build and crumble. And I have learned one thing. The most dangerous creature is not the one with the biggest claws or the sharpest teeth. It is the one that refuses to quit." He looked around at the assembled representatives. "The humans have shown us who they are. They are builders. They are farmers. They are people who take empty land and make it bloom. But when you threaten what they have built, they become something else. They become warriors. They become defenders. They become absolutely relentless." He paused to let his words sink in. "My advice to this council is simple. Do not threaten the humans. Do not attack their worlds. Do not harm their people, because if you do, they will fight. And they will not stop fighting until you are defeated or they are dead. There is no middle ground with them." The council debated for many hours. In the end, they reached a decision. Humanity would be accepted into the galactic community, not as weak newcomers but as respected equals. The story of New Kansas would be taught in schools across the galaxy as an example of what humans were capable of. Back on New Kansas, life returned to normal. The farms were rebuilt, the fields were replanted, the animals were raised, the colony continued to grow. Marcus Webb worked his land just like he always had. He woke before sunrise. He checked his crops. He fed his animals. He fixed what was broken and built what was needed. But now, when he looked at his farm, he saw something more than dirt and plants. He saw a symbol. He saw proof that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. He saw the truth that had always lived in the heart of every farmer. The land was not just something they owned. It was something they were. And when someone threatened the land, they were threatening the farmer's very soul. 5 years after the war, Marcus had a visitor. It was a Vraxi, a young one, barely more than a child by their standards. Marcus watched the alien approach with his hand near his rifle. Old habits died hard. "I mean no harm," the Vraxi said. The translator gave his voice a strange mechanical quality. "I have come to learn." "Learn what?" "I have studied the war. I have studied your people. I want to understand how farmers defeated warriors." Marcus relaxed slightly. The young alien seemed sincere. "You want to understand humans?" "Yes." Marcus thought about it. He could send the creature away. He could be hostile and suspicious. But that wasn't who he was. He was a farmer. Farmers grew things, including understanding. "All right," he said, "I'll tell you." They sat on the porch of the farmhouse. Marcus pointed at the fields that stretched out before them. "You see all that? I built it. My family built it. We worked every day for years to make it what it is. We put our blood and sweat into that soil. When you look at those fields, you see crops. When I look at them, I see my life." The young Vraxi listened carefully. "Your people came here thinking we were prey. You thought we would run because that's what prey does. But we're not prey. We're farmers, and farmers don't run. We can't. Everything we are is tied to the land. If we run, we lose ourselves." "But you could have died." "Yes, many of us did die. But dying while defending your home is better than living while abandoning it. At least, that's what we believe." The Vraxi was silent for a long moment. Then it said, "My people have never understood that. We take what we want. We move from place to place. We have no attachment to land." "Maybe that's why you lost." "Maybe." They sat in silence, watching the sun move across the sky. Eventually, the young Vraxi stood up. "Thank you for speaking with me. I will tell my people what you have said." "Will they understand?" "I don't know, but I will try." The alien left. Marcus watched it go. He thought about the future, about what might happen when humans and Vraxi met again. Maybe there would be more fighting. Maybe there would be peace. He didn't know. What he did know was that his people would be ready. They would always be ready, because that's what farmers were. He stood up and stretched his old bones. There was work to do, crops to tend, animals to feed, a farm to run. Marcus Webb walked into his fields and got back to work. The sun shone down on New Kansas. The grass waved in the wind. The farms stretched out across the plains, tended by people who had proven themselves to be the strongest warriors in the galaxy. Not soldiers, not mercenaries, not killing machines. Farmers, armed farmers ready always.